You have to communicate with your family. You have to communicate with your coworkers. You have to communicate in a personal relationship. So knowing how to communicate is not something that just PR people do or governments do or companies do. It's something people do. I work for Gary Vaynerchuk. I serve as the Chief Value Officer for him, which basically means I help create value for him. So is it communications work on PR with media? Is it building relationships? Is it helping introduce him or the company to people? So what is the thing I can do to create value for him or his businesses or any of his interests? The second hat I wear is Executive Vice President of Business Development. So really helping other brands and companies work with VaynerMedia and the VaynerX company.
VaynerMedia was the first company. After building up Wine Library and then after being an investor in Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and having kind of Silicon Valley success, I decided to start the agency with a premise that eventually I would want to buy nostalgic and historic brands. So now there's a VaynerX holding company.
The successful career it's a work in progress for me. It's not something where I feel like, oh, I've done this now. Like I'm just always like, what's the next thing? Like working for Naguib, and then I went to Google, and then I was like, okay, how can I top that? And then what are things I can be working on?
Give a really warm welcome to Naguib Sawiris.
I like the unexpected in terms of growth, but I also know that the market's changing every day and the players are changing every day. So you just gotta be like, who would have thought all this COVID stuff would happen, right? What is the moment that I realized that communications was important? Was there like a aha moment? There isn't one specific moment, but I do understand the importance of like how I saw things unfolding in the news. And that for me was like understanding how news stories get told, how companies would react to situations. When I saw something happen, a crisis would happen for a company or brand, and they didn't respond fast enough. And I'm like, wait a second, there has to be better communication. There has to be a way for them to explain it in a way that's more transparent. And now because we live in a real time and everything's 24/7, we see it so clearly in front of us. Like when something bad happens and a company doesn't respond right away, people go nuts. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing I thought about it, especially in Egypt in the early days when I done some work for the government and I was a consultant, and I was trying to help them understand that governments like companies need to learn how to communicate. And so the Egyptian government had never had like mutahaddis rasmi. They never had like official spokespeople. And I was like, every ministry should have mutahaddis rasmi, like an official spokesperson who would tell what the policies they're doing, what actions they're doing. And that was a big aha moment for me, and is helping them understand like, you have a lot of stories to tell. You can help make people aware of what efforts you're doing as a government. What are the different policies you're taking? How are decisions being made? How do you inform and influence citizens? I mean, that was also a big thing for me, like understanding how other governments had done it and then seeing the Egyptian government start to implement it was like, it was really rewarding actually. In 2000, PR agencies didn't exist really in Egypt. Right? And so advertising agencies exist, and then they had PR departments within the advertising agencies. And what happened is the way that the equation worked was, and I'll try to say this in English, you'd put out a press release in exchange for an ad. So if you bought an ad, they would publish your news. So it was always related, that the news was related to an ad. And so when I came into the scene and I had worked at Weber Shandwick in the US, I'm like, no, advertising has nothing to do with communications and PR. It's about a key message. It's about a narrative. It's about telling a story that's newsworthy. So how do you get an article in the newspaper? It has to be one of two things. It has to be newsworthy. It means it's worth the coverage of writing a story. And it has to be relevant. So it's in the marketplace at the right time. So you're trying to tell a story that people want, that's relevant. So if you have something that's newsworthy and relevant, you should be able to earn the coverage that you need versus paying for the coverage that you need, which is what an ad basically is. So when I came into the scene, it was like paid media, paid media, paid media. There was no such thing as earned media. Like you didn't earn the right to get a story. You would get it because of a favor of buying an ad. And so when I came in, I tried to change that dynamic of like, no. We need to think about why is this story important? Why does this story add value to the marketplace or the conversation? What key message is really important that we want to share? And that was a big mind shift for people. PR people are coined spin doctors. Like they take something and spin it and try to make something bad look good. Well, you can't. I mean, we're in such a transparent age and everything is real time. You can't fake it till you make it when it comes to communications. It is what it is. And if you try to do that, you won't succeed. So when you think about influence, you have to have credibility. You cannot influence somebody else, whether it's your family member or a company or a business or a brand or a community or a customer or an employee or a new hire, if you don't have the credibility to back it up. People are just too smart for it and they won't fall for it. Everyone should think of themselves as a personal brand. If you have a social media account, you are a brand, whether you like it or not, right? What images are you putting out? What messages are you projecting? That's brand. That's a story. You're sending out messages, whether you like cooking or you like cats or you like politics or you like fashion. Like that's part of the brand identity that you're putting out. Is your profile picture a picture of you? Is it an icon of something? What do you represent? You're always telling a story. The beauty of the internet is it's for free. You can learn everywhere and anywhere. So I put out a lot of information for free on my podcast just because I want to educate and inform. So Digital and Savvy, my podcast is called Savvy Talk. So there's everything there if you're a startup and you can't afford an agency or you just want to learn, like, how do companies handle a crisis? What are some things I should think about? Or what's the best way to build my personal brand? Or what are some really good tips for public speaking? Or how can I add value? So I put it up for free because I feel it adds value to people to just learn in a format where they can just listen in whenever they want, pop in their AirPods, or if they're at home and they just want to just listen to something instead of having the TV on. That's one resource. The second resource is, and there's a ton of other podcasts that are out there for free that obviously you can listen to anything. The other thing is go to YouTube. There are so many great resources online through YouTube. You could take online courses for free from Coursera or from Udemy. There's like a lot of resources. So just making sure that, you know, I talk about this a lot on my podcast, like being a lifelong learner, like always trying to sharpen your saw, make sure you're understanding the latest things that are happening in communications. And then to be a good, writer, you need to be a good reader. So read a lot, like read some blogs, follow some people on Twitter, find out what's the best way to keep sharp. There's enough information out there for free that you can, absorb it. But you have to take time and you have to put in the work. So when we think about communications, like you have to communicate with your family. You have to communicate with your coworkers. You have to communicate in a personal relationship. So knowing how to communicate is not something that just PR people do or governments do or companies do. It's something people do. And I think if we've learned anything in COVID, it is that you have to learn how to communicate and to stand out because you're not bumping into people at events. You're not out in public where you can travel and see people regularly.